Her name was Catherine Walsh, but everyone who loved her called her Kate. She had grown up in a small house on the edge of town, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress, and she had always dreamed of something more. Not just more money, though that was part of it, but more excitement, more glamour, more of the life she saw in movies and magazines. She wanted to matter, to be someone people noticed, to live a life that felt significant. When she met Thomas Gray at 24, she thought maybe she had found a path to something better. Tom was a teacher at the local high school, passionate about literature and dedicated to his students. He didn't have much money, but he had warmth and kindness, and a way of making her feel like she was the most important person in the world when he looked at her. Their wedding was small, held in the community center with folding chairs and homemade decorations. Kate's mother made her dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar. Tom wore his only suit, slightly too big in the shoulders. They couldn't afford a honeymoon, so they spent their wedding night in the apartment they had already been sharing, eating leftover cake and talking about their future. Tom promised her they would build a good life together. He talked about eventually getting his master's degree, maybe becoming a principal someday, buying a house with a yard where they could raise children. His dreams were modest but genuine, and for a while, Kate let herself believe they were enough. The first few years of their marriage were happy in a simple way. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture and dishes from the thrift store. Tom would grade papers at the kitchen table while Kate worked on her laptop, managing social media for small local businesses. They had movie nights on Fridays, takeout on Saturdays, and lazy Sunday mornings reading the newspaper together. Tom was affectionate and attentive. He left notes in her lunch bag, brought her coffee in bed on weekends, remembered every anniversary and birthday. He was proud of her work, even though it didn't pay much, and he encouraged her ambitions. When she talked about wanting to grow her client base, to build something bigger, he listened and offered support. But as the years passed, Kate found herself increasingly restless. She was 30 now, and when she looked around at their life, she felt like they were standing still while everyone else moved forward. Her college friends were buying houses, taking vacations to Europe, driving new cars. Meanwhile, she and Tom were still in the same apartment, still counting pennies, still making do with old furniture and limited options. It wasn't that Tom didn't work hard. He did. He poured himself into his teaching, staying late to help struggling students, spending his own money on classroom supplies, genuinely caring about making a difference. But teachers didn't make much money, and his dedication didn't translate into financial security. Every month was a careful balancing act of bills and budgets, and Kate was tired of it. She started to resent Tom for being content with so little. When he came home excited about a student's breakthrough or a successful lesson, she found herself unable to share his enthusiasm. Who cares about some kid's essay when we can't even afford to fix the car, she would think, though she never said it out loud. Tom noticed the change in her, the distance that was growing between them. He tried to talk to her about it, asked her what was wrong, what he could do to make things better. But Kate didn't know how to explain the vague dissatisfaction she felt, the sense that life was passing her by, that she had settled for less than she deserved. "I'm fine," she would tell him, "just tired, just stressed about work." And Tom, kind and trusting, believed her. The turning point came at a networking event Kate attended for her business. It was held at an upscale hotel downtown, the kind of place she rarely went, full of successful people in expensive clothes, discussing deals and opportunities. She felt out of place in her department store dress, but she was determined to make connections, to grow her business beyond small local clients. That's where she met Richard Blackwood. He was 45, divorced, and wealthy in a way that seemed almost fictional to Kate.
He owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states, lived in a mansion on the hill overlooking the city, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never had to worry about money. Richard approached her at the bar, commenting on how she seemed more interesting than most of the people in the room. His attention was flattering, his interest apparent. They talked for over an hour about her business, about his success, about life and ambition.
He gave her his card and told her to call him if she ever wanted to discuss marketing strategies for his dealerships. Kate went home that night and looked Richard up online. The photos showed him at charity galas, at grand openings, at exclusive events. His house had been featured in a magazine about luxury homes. His net worth was estimated in the tens of millions. He represented everything she had dreamed about, everything she felt she was missing. She told herself it was just a business opportunity when she called him the next day. They met for coffee to discuss marketing plans, and Richard was charming and attentive, asking about her ideas, seeming genuinely interested in her thoughts. He offered her a contract to handle social media for all his dealerships, at a rate that was triple what she was currently making. Kate accepted immediately. The money would change everything for her and Tom. They could finally start saving for a house, could stop worrying about every expense, could breathe a little easier. But the business relationship quickly became something more. Richard started inviting her to dinners to discuss strategy, to events where she could network with potential clients, to lunches that had nothing to do with work. And Kate, flattered by the attention of this successful, wealthy man, found herself saying yes more often than she should. Richard was everything Tom wasn't. He was smooth where Tom was earnest, sophisticated where Tom was simple, commanding where Tom was gentle. He took her to expensive restaurants and ordered wine that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. He talked about his travels, his investments, his plans to expand his business empire. He made her feel sophisticated and important, like she was part of a world that mattered. Kate told herself she was just enjoying the professional relationship, that there was nothing wrong with having a successful mentor. But she knew she was lying to herself. She was attracted to Richard, to his wealth, to the life he represented. And Richard, who was used to getting what he wanted, made his intentions clear. "You're wasting your potential with that teacher husband of yours," he told her one evening over dinner. "You could be so much more than you are. You deserve better than struggling in a 2-bedroom apartment, counting pennies. You deserve the kind of life I could give you." "I'm married," Kate said, but her protest was weak. "So was I," Richard replied. "Until I realized life was too short to stay in a situation that wasn't making me happy." "You're not happy, Kate. I can see it. Why stay in a marriage that's holding you back?" His words planted seeds in soil that was already fertile with discontent. Kate started to think more seriously about what her life could be like with Richard. No more worrying about money. No more making do with second-hand furniture and cheap clothes. No more feeling inferior to her more successful friends. She could have the life she had always wanted, the life she felt she deserved. The affair started gradually, almost inevitably. A kiss after a business dinner, a hotel room after an event, stolen afternoons that turned into regular meetings. Kate told herself she was being practical, that she was securing her future, that love wasn't enough when you were struggling to pay bills. Tom suspected something was wrong before he knew what it was. Kate was distant, distracted, often out late for work reasons that seemed increasingly implausible. She was less affectionate, less engaged in their relationship, always somewhere else, even when she was physically present. One evening, Tom confronted her directly. "Are you having an affair?" he asked, his voice quiet and pained. Kate could have lied. Part of her wanted to, but she was tired of the deception, tired of living 2 lives. "Yes," she said, "I am." Tom's face went pale. He sat down heavily on their worn couch, And for a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he asked, "Who?" "Does it matter?" Kate replied, defensive. "It matters to me." So she told him about Richard, about the business relationship that had become personal, about the affair. She didn't tell him about the money, about the expensive dinners and gifts, because she knew how that would sound. But Tom was smart enough to figure it out. "He's rich," Tom said quietly. "That's what this is about." "It's not just about money," Kate protested. "He makes me feel valued, important. He sees my potential." "And I don't?" Tom's voice was thick with hurt. "I've always believed in you, always supported you, always been proud of everything you've accomplished. But that's not enough, is it? Because I can't buy you expensive things or take you to fancy restaurants?" "You don't understand the pressure," Kate said. "I'm tired of struggling, tired of always worrying about money, tired of feeling like we're going nowhere." "We were building something together," Tom said. "It was slow, but it was real."
It was ours. Well, maybe I don't want slow, Kate said, anger rising to cover her guilt. Maybe I want more than you can give me. Tom stood up, and there were tears in his eyes, but his voice was steady. "Then I guess there's nothing more to say. If you want him, if you want that life more than you want us, then go. I won't stop you. I won't fight for someone who doesn't want to be fought for." His dignity in that moment, his refusal to beg or plead, made Kate feel worse somehow. She had expected anger or desperate attempts to change her mind. Instead, Tom just looked sad and resigned, as if he had known all along that he wasn't enough for her. Kate moved out that weekend. Richard helped, sending movers to pack her things, setting her up in a luxury apartment downtown as a transition before she moved into his mansion. Tom wasn't there when she left. He had gone to stay with his brother, unable to watch her walk away. The divorce was quick and relatively painless. Tom didn't fight over possessions or money. He just signed the papers and let her go. And Kate told herself his lack of resistance proved he hadn't really loved her that much anyway. It was easier than admitting she had broken the heart of a good man who had loved her completely. Her new life with Richard started like a fairy tale. The mansion was enormous, with rooms she rarely went into, a pool, a home theater, a wine cellar. She had a walk-in closet bigger than the bedroom she had shared with Tom, filled with designer clothes Richard bought for her. She drove a luxury car, ate at the best restaurants, attended exclusive events where everyone knew Richard's name. Richard showered her with gifts and attention, at least at first. He seemed proud to have her on his arm, showing her off at parties and business functions. He liked that she was younger, attractive, ambitious. She was proof of his success, another acquisition to add to his collection. But as the initial excitement faded, Kate began to see the reality behind the glamorous facade. Richard was charming in public, but cold in private. He was generous with money, but stingy with emotional intimacy. He had moods that could turn dark without warning. And when he was angry, he was cruel in ways that left no physical marks, but plenty of emotional damage. He criticized her constantly, finding fault with her appearance, her intelligence, her social skills. She was too fat, then too thin. She talked too much or not enough. She embarrassed him with her lower-class background, her lack of sophistication, her inability to navigate his world with the ease he expected. "You're lucky I took you on," he would say when she protested his treatment. "Where would you be without me? Back in that sad little apartment with that pathetic teacher? I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Kate found herself walking on eggshells.
constantly trying to anticipate his moods, to be whatever version of herself would please him that day. She felt more trapped than she ever had in her modest apartment with Tom, because at least there she had been free to be herself. She thought about leaving, but where would she go? Back to Tom, who she had betrayed and abandoned? To her parents, who had been so disappointed when she left her husband for a rich man? She had burned her bridges and made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Richard was also controlling in ways that became increasingly obvious. He monitored her phone and her computer, checking who she talked to and what she said. He discouraged her from maintaining friendships, saying her old friends were beneath them now. He gave her an allowance rather than access to accounts, making her ask for money like a child. And he was unfaithful. Kate discovered this 8 months into their marriage when she came home early from a canceled appointment and found him with another woman. When she confronted him, he was unapologetic. "Don't be naive," he said coldly. "Men like me don't do monogamy. You have everything you wanted, the house, the cars, the lifestyle. What more do you want?" "I want respect," Kate said, her voice shaking. "I want to be treated like a partner, not a possession." Richard laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You are a possession, darling. A very expensive one, but a possession nonetheless. That's what you signed up for when you left your boring teacher husband for me. You chose this life. Now live with it." Kate realized in that moment what she had done. She had traded a loving relationship for a comfortable prison. She had given up someone who valued her for who she was, for someone who valued her for what she represented. She had made the worst mistake of her life. She started to think about Tom, about the life they had shared. The apartment that had seemed so small now looked cozy in her memory. The simple dinners they had cooked together now seemed more meaningful than any expensive restaurant. The gentle way Tom had held her, the way he had listened when she talked, the way he had supported her dreams without trying to control them, all of it took on a significance she hadn't appreciated at the time. She tried to find out how Tom was doing, discreetly asking mutual acquaintances, looking him up on social media. She learned he was still teaching, still living in the same town. He had moved to a small house, nothing fancy but his own. He wasn't dating anyone, as far as she could tell. The thought that she might have damaged him so badly he couldn't trust anyone else made her feel sick with guilt. Kate thought about reaching out to him, about apologizing, about trying to explain. But what would she say? "I'm sorry I threw away our marriage for money and status, and it turns out you were right all along?" She had no right to burden him with her regrets. One evening, about a year into her marriage to Richard, Kate was driving home from a charity event alone. Richard had left early with another woman, not even bothering to hide it anymore. Kate was tired and sad and felt more alone than she ever had in her life. She was thinking about Tom, about their first apartment, about the way he used to leave her notes saying he loved her. She was thinking about how she had taken all of that for granted, how she had valued all the wrong things. She was thinking that maybe she needed to leave Richard, that even being alone would be better than staying in this gilded cage. She didn't see the truck run the red light, didn't have time to react or brake or do anything. The impact was instant and devastating, the sound of metal crushing and glass shattering filling the air. Kate's luxury car, with all its safety features and expensive engineering, crumpled like paper. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but there was little they could do. Kate was alive, but barely, her injuries severe and multiple. They rushed her to the hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save her life. Richard was called, and he came to the hospital, but more out of obligation than genuine concern. He stood in the ICU, looking at Kate, tubes and machines keeping her alive, and felt primarily annoyed.
This was inconvenient, disruptive to his life. He had plans that evening, business to attend to. He stayed for an hour, then left, telling the nurses to call him if there was any change. Kate lingered for 3 days. She was conscious sometimes, drifting in and out of awareness.
The doctors said her injuries were too severe, that there was nothing more they could do. It was just a matter of time. In one of her conscious moments, Kate asked a nurse to call Tom. She gave them his number, which she still remembered, though she had deleted it from her phone months ago at Richard's insistence. The nurse made the call. Tom came immediately, rushing to the hospital as soon as he heard. When he walked into Kate's room and saw her broken body, tears filled his eyes. He sat beside her bed and took her hand gently, carefully, as if she might break further. Kate opened her eyes and saw him there, and tears began to fall. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice weak and raspy. "I'm so sorry, Tom." "Shh," he said gently. "Don't try to talk. Save your strength." But she needed to say it, needed him to know. "I was wrong," she continued, "about everything. You were enough. You were always enough. I just couldn't see it. I chose all the wrong things." Tom's tears were falling freely now. "I loved you," he said. "I still love you. I never stopped." "I know," Kate whispered, "and I threw it away. For nothing. For worse than nothing." They sat together in silence, Tom holding her hand, both of them crying for what had been lost, for what could never be recovered. Kate fell asleep with Tom beside her, and for the first time in over a year, she felt something like peace. She died the next morning, quietly, with Tom still holding her hand. The doctor said she had just slipped away, that it was peaceful. Tom sat with her body for a long time after, saying goodbye to the woman he had loved, the woman who had broken his heart, the woman he had never been able to stop caring about. The funeral was held 4 days later, on a gray autumn morning, with leaves falling and the smell of rain in the air. Richard arranged everything, sparing no expense. The casket was expensive, the flowers elaborate, the service held at the largest church in town. It was exactly the kind of showy display Richard preferred, more about his image than about Kate. Tom arrived early, before most of the other mourners. He wore his only suit, the same one he had worn to their wedding, a little more worn now, but still respectable. He stood in front of Kate's casket, looking at her peaceful face, remembering the girl he had fallen in love with, the woman he had married, the future they had planned together. "I hope you found what you were looking for," he said quietly.
"And I hope, in the end, you knew that you were always enough for me, just as you were." Other mourners began to arrive. Kate's parents, devastated by the loss of their daughter. Her few remaining friends, shocked by her sudden death. Colleagues and acquaintances, most of whom Kate had known only superficially. And Richard, arriving in his expensive car with his current girlfriend on his arm, treating the funeral like a social obligation rather than a genuine mourning. He shook hands and accepted condolences with a practiced smile, playing the part of the grieving husband while already planning how quickly he could move on. The service was generic and impersonal, conducted by a priest who hadn't known Kate. He spoke in platitudes about loss and eternal rest, about a life cut short, about the comfort of faith. Nothing he said captured who Kate really was, the complexity of her choices, the tragedy of her mistakes. After the service, people gathered outside the church before heading to the cemetery. Tom stood apart from the crowd, not wanting to intrude, just wanting to pay his respects and leave. But Richard noticed him and walked over, the girlfriend excusing herself to talk to someone else. "You must be the teacher," Richard said, his tone dismissive. "Kate mentioned you occasionally." "Tom," he said simply. "My name is Tom." "Right," Richard said. "Well, thank you for coming. I'm sure Kate would have appreciated it." There was something in Richard's tone, a casual cruelty, that made Tom look at him more carefully. This was the man Kate had left him for, the man she had thought would give her a better life. And Tom saw clearly what Kate must have eventually seen, that beneath the expensive suit and practiced charm was someone fundamentally empty, someone incapable of genuine love or care. "Did you love her?" Tom asked suddenly. Richard looked surprised by the question. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one," Tom said. "Did you love my wife?" "She wasn't your wife," Richard corrected. "She was mine." "She was my wife for 6 years," Tom said quietly. "She was your wife for 1. And I asked if you loved her." Richard's expression hardened. "I gave her everything she wanted. The house, the cars, the lifestyle. What more is there?" "Everything," Tom said simply. "There's everything more. There's caring about her thoughts and dreams. There's being there when she's scared or sad. There's knowing her favorite book and the way she likes her coffee. There's loving who she is, not what she looks like on your arm. There's all of that, and you gave her none of it." "You don't know anything about our marriage," Richard said coldly. "I know she called for me when she was dying," Tom said, and watched Richard's face register surprise. "I know she spent her last hours regretting her choice, apologizing for throwing away what we had. I know she realized, too late, that she had traded something real for something hollow. And I know that when she died holding my hand, not yours." Richard's face flushed with anger. "She used you," he said viciously. "She was with you until someone better came along. She was a gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. Don't romanticize it." "You're wrong," Tom said calmly. "She wasn't a gold digger. She was just someone who lost sight of what mattered. She thought money and status would make her happy, and she learned the hard way that they don't. She made a mistake, a terrible mistake that cost her everything. But she wasn't evil or calculating. She was just human and flawed, and she paid for her mistakes with her life." He turned to walk away, but Richard grabbed his arm. "You think you're better than me?" he said. "You think your poverty and your noble suffering make you superior?" Tom pulled his arm free and looked Richard in the eye. "I don't think I'm better than you," he said. "I just think I loved her more. And in the end, that's what she wanted. Not your money or your house or your fancy lifestyle, just someone who genuinely loved her. And she realized she had thrown that away for nothing." He walked away then, leaving Richard standing alone, angry and defensive, and unable to argue because everything Tom said was true. Richard had given Kate material wealth, but nothing of substance. He had possessed her, but never loved her. And in her final moments, she had called for someone else. Tom went to the cemetery, but stood apart from the burial service. He watched from a distance as they lowered Kate into the ground, as the priest said final words, as mourners threw flowers onto the casket. He didn't need to be part of the official ceremony. His goodbye had already been said in the hospital room, in those final moments when Kate had apologized and he had held her hand. When everyone else had left, when the cemetery workers had finished filling in the grave, Tom approached. He stood alone beside the fresh earth, looking at the temporary marker that would eventually be replaced with a permanent stone. "I forgive you," he said quietly, "for all of it. I forgive you for leaving, for choosing money over love, for breaking my heart.
I forgive you because holding on to anger would just hurt me, and I've been hurt enough. And I hope, wherever you are, you've found peace. I hope you understand now what really matters. I hope you know that you were always loved, truly loved, even after you left, even after everything. He placed a single white rose on the grave, the same kind of flower he used to bring her when they were dating, when they were happy, when they were building a life together. Then he turned and walked away, back to his small house and his teaching job and his simple life. The life Kate had rejected. The life that had been enough all along, if only she had been able to see it. Tom never remarried. He dated occasionally over the years, but he never found anyone who affected him the way Kate had. He threw himself into his teaching, becoming one of those legendary educators that students remember decades later as having changed their lives. He found meaning and purpose in his work, in helping young people, in making a difference in quiet, undramatic ways. He kept one photo of Kate from their wedding day, when she had smiled at him with such love and hope. He looked at it sometimes and remembered the good years, before the discontent set in, before she started wanting more than he could give. He remembered loving her and being loved by her, and he tried to focus on that rather than on the pain that came later. As for Richard, he moved on quickly, as Tom had known he would. Within 3 months of Kate's death, he was publicly dating someone new, a younger woman who looked at his wealth with the same hungry eyes Kate once had. He married her within a year, a lavish ceremony that was more spectacle than celebration. But Richard found that his new wife was just like Kate had been, attracted to his money but not to him. And she, like Kate, eventually realized that wealth without genuine connection was a prison, not a paradise. She left him after 2 years, taking a significant portion of his assets in the divorce. Richard found himself alone, surrounded by expensive possessions, but devoid of meaningful relationships. He thought about Kate sometimes, about how she had called for her ex-husband as she was dying, about what Tom had said at the funeral. Richard tried to dismiss it, to tell himself that Tom was just a bitter ex-husband, romanticizing a failed marriage. But in his most honest moments, usually late at night when he was alone in his mansion, Richard wondered if Tom had been right, if maybe there was something more to life than accumulation and acquisition, something Richard had never learned how to access. Kate's parents eventually placed a permanent headstone on her grave. It was simple, just her name and dates, and a line that her mother had chosen, "Beloved daughter, lost and found too late." Tom visited occasionally, always alone, always bringing white roses. He would stand there for a few minutes, remembering, forgiving, letting go a little more each time. Years later, Tom's students would sometimes ask him about relationships, about how to know if you were with the right person, about what really mattered in life. And Tom would tell them, without mentioning Kate specifically, that the right person was someone who valued you for who you were, not for what you could provide. That real love was about connection and care, not status or possessions. That the most important things in life couldn't be bought or displayed or used to impress others. Some people spend their whole lives chasing things that don't matter, he would say, and by the time they realize what they've lost, it's too late to get it back. So choose carefully. Choose people who see you, who value you, who want to build something real with you. Everything else is just noise. His students didn't know he was speaking from experience, didn't know about Kate or Richard or the funeral, where 2 men who had both been married to the same woman finally met. They just knew that Mr. Gray seemed to speak from someplace deep and true, that his advice came from hard-won wisdom rather than abstract theory. And Tom,
living his modest life in his small house, teaching his classes and helping his students, and finding meaning in work and connection rather than wealth and status, knew something that Kate had learned too late, that the richest life wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in love and purpose and the impact you had on others.
That you could have everything and still have nothing if you didn't have genuine connection. That sometimes the person you left behind was the person you should have stayed with all along. The story of Kate's choices and their consequences became a kind of cautionary tale in their small town, though the details were known only to a few. People who had witnessed the breakdown of her marriage to Tom, her quick remarriage to Richard, and her tragic death, drew their own conclusions about what it all meant. Some said she got what she deserved, that karma had caught up with her for leaving a good man for a rich one. Others felt sorry for her, seeing her as a victim of societal pressure to have more, be more, achieve more. A few understood that it was more complicated than either simple judgment, that Kate had been a flawed human being who made understandable, if wrong, choices, and who paid a terrible price for those choices. But the people whose opinions mattered most, Tom and Richard, rarely spoke about Kate after that funeral. Tom, because the wound was too deep and too personal to share. Richard, because acknowledging the truth about his relationship with Kate would mean acknowledging truths about himself he preferred to avoid. They never spoke to each other again after that day at the cemetery. They had nothing more to say. Everything important had been communicated in that brief, harsh conversation outside the church. Tom knew what kind of man Richard was. Richard knew what he had failed to be. Neither needed to revisit it. On the anniversary of Kate's death, Tom always visited her grave. He would stand there with his white roses and think about the girl he had loved, the woman she had become, the choices she had made. He had long since forgiven her, had released his anger and hurt. But he still mourned what could have been, the life they might have built if she had been able to see that what they had was enough. "I hope you're at peace," he would say each year. "I hope you understand now. I hope wherever you are, you know that you were loved, really loved, not for what you looked like or what you represented, but for who you actually were. And I'm sorry I couldn't make you see that was worth more than anything money could buy." And then he would leave the roses and walk away, back to his life, carrying his grief and his memories, but not letting them consume him. He had learned that you could survive heartbreak, that you could build a meaningful life even after losing the person you thought was your future. It wasn't the life he had planned or wanted, but it was his, and he had made it count for something. The final irony was that Kate had spent her life chasing significance, wanting to matter, wanting to be someone people noticed and remembered. And in the end, the person who remembered her most, who honored her memory, who truly mourned her loss, was the man she had left behind. Tom, the teacher she had deemed not successful enough, not wealthy enough, not enough, period. He was the one who had really loved her. He was the one whose life had been genuinely changed by knowing her. He was the one who carried her memory forward with grace and forgiveness. Richard, with all his wealth and status, had already forgotten Kate beyond the inconvenience her death had caused. She had been replaced, her memory barely a footnote in his life. The man who had seemed to offer her everything had given her nothing lasting, nothing real, nothing that mattered in the end. And so Kate's story became a testament to the most basic of truths. that love matters more than money, that character matters more than status, that real wealth is measured in relationships and impact rather than bank accounts and possessions. It was a truth she had learned too late, a lesson that had cost her everything. But perhaps her story could teach others what she had failed to understand in time. Perhaps someone else, faced with a similar choice, would remember the woman who left her husband for a millionaire and died too young, full of regret. Perhaps someone else would choose differently, would value love over luxury, would recognize that enough was actually more than enough when it came with genuine connection and care. That, Tom thought, on the 10-year anniversary of Kate's death, standing at her grave with his white roses, would be the only way to redeem her mistakes. If her story helped even one person make a better choice, see what really mattered before it was too late, then perhaps her tragic life would have served some purpose beyond her own pain. "I still love you," he said quietly to the stone that marked where she rested. "After everything, after all these years, I still love you. And I forgive you. I hope that matters." "I hope, somehow, you know." The wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree that shaded Kate's grave, and Tom imagined it was her way of answering, of saying she understood, of thanking him for his grace and his enduring love. It was fanciful, perhaps even foolish, but it brought him comfort. And comfort, he had learned, was something you took where you could find it. He left the roses and walked away for the last time. He had decided this would be his final visit. 10 years was long enough to mourn, long enough to hold on to the past. It was time to let Kate rest, to release her fully, to stop returning to this place of grief and regret. He had loved her, had mourned her, had forgiven her. Now it was time to move forward completely, to live the rest of his life without this annual pilgrimage to remember what he had lost. Kate was gone, had been gone for a decade, and while he would never forget her, he needed to stop actively remembering. As he walked through the cemetery gates for the last time, Tom felt something lift from his shoulders. The weight he had been carrying, the grief he had been holding on to, the what-ifs and if-onlys that had haunted him for years, all of it seemed to lighten. He had done what he could do. He had loved well, forgiven completely, remembered with grace. There was nothing more to be done. Kate's grave, with its simple stone and the white roses Tom had left, sat peacefully under the old oak tree. The wind continued to rustle the leaves, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting dappled light across the cemetery. And in that quiet, peaceful place, Kate rested, her tumultuous life over, her mistakes and regrets finally at peace. The story of the woman who left her husband for a millionaire, of the 2 men who met at her funeral, of the choices that led to tragedy, slowly faded from memory as years passed. New dramas unfolded, new stories emerged, and Kate became just another name on a stone in a cemetery, another life that had ended too soon. But the lessons remained, carried forward by those who had known her, taught by Tom to generations of students, whispered as warnings to those who valued the wrong things. That real wealth couldn't be counted in bank accounts, that love was worth more than luxury, that sometimes the person who seemed like not enough was actually everything you needed. That choosing wrong could cost you more than you imagined. And in the end, those lessons were Kate's legacy, more valuable than anything Richard's money could have bought, more lasting than any material possession. She had learned what mattered, but only after it was too late to act on that knowledge. Her hope, if she had been capable of hope in those final moments, would have been that others would learn from her mistakes, would choose better, would recognize love when they had it and hold on to it with both hands. Because in the end, that was all that really mattered. Not the size of your house or the cost of your car or the impressiveness of your lifestyle. Just love, genuine and true, given and received freely. Just connection, real and deep, built on honesty and care. Just the simple, profound gift of being truly seen and valued by another person. Tom had given that to Kate, and she had thrown it away. Richard had promised it, but never delivered. And Kate had died knowing the difference, understanding too late what she had lost and what she had gained, recognizing that the trade she had made was the worst decision of her life. That understanding, that final clarity, was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because at least she died knowing the truth. A curse because she died knowing she could never fix her mistakes, never undo her choices, never go back to the man who had really loved her and try again. Tom carried that knowledge with him as he left the cemetery for the last time. He had been there at the end, had heard her apologies, had held her hand as she died. He knew she understood, and he hoped that understanding had brought her some measure of peace in her final moments, some sense that even though she had made terrible mistakes, she was still loved, still forgiven, still valued for who she had been beneath all the wrong choices. As he drove away from the cemetery, Tom thought about the students he would teach the next day, the lessons he would share, the impact he would have in his quiet, undramatic way. He thought about the life he had built from the ruins of his broken marriage, the meaning he had found in work and purpose rather than wealth and status. And he thought about Kate, always Kate, the woman he had loved and lost twice, first to her own ambitions and then to death. He thought about her with sadness, but also with acceptance, with forgiveness, but also with wisdom. He had learned from loving her and losing her. He had grown from the pain she had caused and the grief he had endured. In the end, that was perhaps the final gift she had given him, the knowledge of what really mattered, the understanding of what was worth holding on to and what was worth letting go. It was a gift bought with tremendous pain, with heartbreak and loss and years of mourning. But it was a gift nonetheless, and Tom had used it well, had built a good life on the foundation of that hard-won wisdom. And so the story ended where it began, with Tom driving away from Kate's grave, carrying his memories and his forgiveness, heading back to his small house and his teaching job, and his simple, meaningful life. The life Kate had rejected, the life that had been enough all along, the life that in the end was richer than anything Richard's millions could buy. Because Tom had learned the secret Kate never did until it was too late, that the richest life was the one filled with love and purpose and genuine connection, not the one filled with expensive possessions and empty status. That lesson, learned through pain and loss, was his to carry forward, to share with others, to live out in every choice he made. And in that living, in that sharing, Kate's story found its redemption. Not in her own life, which ended in tragedy and regret, but in the lives she touched, the lessons she taught through her mistakes, the understanding she imparted through her suffering. That was her legacy, unexpected and unintended, but real nonetheless. The woman who left her husband for a millionaire, who died too young and full of regret, who brought two very different men together at her funeral, taught the world a simple truth, that love is worth more than money, that character matters more than status, that the person who seems like enough usually is, if only we have the wisdom to see it. And Tom, the teacher she left behind, carried that truth forward with grace and dedication, making sure that Kate's mistakes would not be entirely in vain, that her story would help others choose better, love wiser, value what truly mattered. It was the least he could do for the woman he had loved, the woman who had broken his heart, the woman he had never been able to stop caring about. In the end, that was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all he had, all he could do, all he could offer to the memory of a woman who had chosen wrong and paid the ultimate price for that choice. And in doing so, in carrying her memory forward with such grace and forgiveness, Tom proved once more what he had always known: that real wealth couldn't be measured in dollars, that real success couldn't be measured in status, that real love couldn't be bought or traded or replaced. It could only be given, freely and completely, without conditions or expectations. Tom had given that to Kate, both during their marriage and after her death. And in doing so, he had proven himself to be far richer than Richard would ever be, regardless of how many millions sat in Richard's bank accounts. That was the final truth, the ultimate lesson, the lasting legacy of a tragic story. That the man with the least money had the most wealth. That the teacher nobody noticed was the one who mattered most. That real value had nothing to do with net worth and everything to do with character, compassion, and the capacity to love even after being hurt. Tom knew that truth, lived that truth, embodied that truth in everything he did. And in doing so, he honored Kate's memory far better than any expensive funeral or elaborate headstone ever could. He honored her by being exactly who he had always been: a good man who loved well, forgave completely, and never let bitterness or pain turn him into something less than he was. And perhaps that, in the end, was the only happy ending available in such a tragic story. That the good man stayed good. That the love he offered was real, even when rejected. That the life he built from the ashes of his broken heart was meaningful and full of purpose. Not the ending anyone would have chosen, not the story anyone would have wanted to tell, but an ending nonetheless that contained its own quiet redemption, its own subtle triumph of character over circumstance, of love over loss, of grace over grief. Tom drove home through the autumn afternoon, the last of the white roses left behind on Kate's grave, his heart lighter than it had been in years, his spirit finally free from the weight of a decade of mourning. He had loved and lost and learned and grown. And that, he realized, was all any of us could do with the time we were given, the hearts we were given, the capacity for love and forgiveness that made us human. It was enough. It had always been enough. And finally, after all these years, Tom truly understood that truth, not just intellectually, but in his bones, in his soul, in every part of who he was. And with that understanding came peace, real and lasting, the kind of peace that Kate had sought her whole life but never found, the kind of peace that couldn't be bought or achieved or earned, only accepted as a gift from the universe, from life itself, from the simple act of choosing love over fear, forgiveness over anger, grace over bitterness. And so the story ended, not with triumph or tragedy, but with quiet acceptance, with gentle wisdom, with the understanding that some lessons can only be learned through pain, some wisdom can only be gained through loss, some peace can only be found through forgiveness. It was a bittersweet ending, tinged with sadness, but also with hope, acknowledging the pain of the past while embracing the possibility of the future. Tom carried that understanding forward into the rest of his life, into all his days to come, and somewhere, in whatever place she had gone, Kate finally rested in peace, her restless striving over, her endless wanting stilled, her tragic story complete. The two men who had both loved her in their different ways, who had both lost her to choices beyond their control, went on with their separate lives, forever changed by knowing her, forever shaped by loving her, forever carrying the lessons her life and death had taught. And the white roses on her grave, left by the man she had rejected, stood as a testament to a love that had endured beyond betrayal, beyond death, beyond all reasonable expectation. A love that asked nothing and gave everything. A love that was, in the end, the only thing that really mattered.